So we can start now. Thank you very much for waiting. Good morning. Welcome to all of you. I hope that you enjoyed the evening, the karaoke, and the funny time we had together. And I hope that you are all prepared for the last day and last discussions of this March board meeting. So we will change the order of the items of this morning in the agenda, and starting with the approval the discussion, if any, and approval of the terms of reference for the IMAG, the mechanism that we have discussed to monitor the adoption and implementation of the sustainability standards, and to identify any possible improvements or issues that we may need to provide support to, on which we may need to provide support to stakeholders. And for that, I will hand over to Sylvia, who will update you on the refinements made on the terms of reference, which were circulated today and yesterday, and that you may have had the opportunity to see. Sylvia, please. Thank you very much for the work done.
Thank you, Gabriella. So as Gabriella mentioned yesterday, I circulated to you the updated version of the terms of reference for the IMAG. I'm still struggling. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but we will come up with the name for it. So thank you for all the comments you have provided during the session. I will just quickly go through the changes, only a couple. Regarding the objectives of this group, we made some changes to reflect the comments that were made. In point A, based on Amarjit's suggestion, we changed the language to refer to the actual and the planned implementation of IESBA. That could be a basis for the views from the members of the group. In point B, we deleted the example or the reference to the possible refinement, simplification, and other movements to the IESA. We believe that it's not necessary, and the content wouldn't change in that regard with the deletion of this example. And finally, towards the end of the document, we included a new bullet point based on Amarjit's suggestion that the group and the chair should have the discretion or the possibility to invite experts to that meeting beyond the membership to discuss matters related to the objective of the IMAG. And I wanted to thank to Paul. He's not here, but he provided some comments offline that we discussed, and those were really useful comments regarding the operation of this IMAG. But we believe that at this point, probably it's not necessary to include that in the TOR, because we wanted to keep it brief and short and concise. But we will keep those comments in mind when the group is already operating. So these were the changes we made to the text, and I'm just seeing if there's any comments on the updated version of the terms of reference.
Thank you, Sylvia. So are there any comments from the board members on this new version of the terms of reference? Well, Sylvia, I think that everyone is happy with the amendments and the changes that you made. And I think that we can now, consider the approval of this document. Ken?
Yes, the document is basically approved by the board. We will take it forward then. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Janine.
Oh, Janine.
We didn't see you. We need to move forward.
Yes, thank you. I had a question in relation to potential amendments or refinements, simplifications, or other improvements to ISA. That is now deleted. But I wanted to understand why, because who will propose any topics that should be taken further, maybe for a in the end, a rapid response mechanism, as we discussed yesterday. How does that work? Who will decide which issues that come out of the IMAG discussions should be brought here to the board? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Janine. Yeah, so the group, as we mentioned, there will be the group will be chaired by an IESBA member as well, and the staff will provide the support. So there will be a constant communication between the board and the EMAG on the board meeting, report back on the issue. So eventually, it's still on the board's decision how to respond to these challenges that have been raised. But the IMAG will help to get insights and information about the challenges and propose possible solutions, but it will be reported back to the board.
Thank you for the clarification. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Janine. And my anticipation is that once the IMAG is up and running, the board will receive quarterly updates from the IMAG via the board member who will be chairing the group plus the staff, together with any matters of coordination as we might have identified them in our interactions with the corresponding group on the IWSB side, which is the TICG, as we discussed on Monday. So with that, with the board approval of the terms of reference, the staff will take it forward. We will work with the ANI working group with regard to identification of the members of the IMAG, and then we will report back to the board in June with regard to the composition of the group.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Sylvia, and all those who worked on this document and on the amendments to the document, following up on the discussions and suggestions from the board. So we can now move to the next topic in the agenda, which is the approval or consideration for approval of the consultation document on CIVs and audit independence considerations for auditors of CIVs. As you remember, on Monday, we had a very substantial discussion on this document and the considerations underlying this document. The group, the staff team the project team worked over these 2 days to accommodate and process the many comments and many questions, considerations, suggestions provided by the board members, and came up with a revised document. As Ken mentioned yesterday, we invite you mostly to focus on the questions included in this consultation document. This, of course, does not preclude any other comments that you may have, but this should be our priority because it was apparently what was where the board members had more comments and where we should focus, because it's what will allow us to collect significant and meaningful information. So thank you, project team, for the intense work of these 2 days during the board meeting. And I'm going to hand over to Linda to present the changes made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. All right, so yes, on this project, first of all, I want to point out we have worked very intensively over the past couple of days and made a lot of changes to the document. So we understand that you may not have had a chance to review it in the tight timeline. But I want to kind of point out the kind of maybe the substantive changes that were made in the document. First of all, we know there were some questions about unrelated third parties. We also know that that term is not favored, but we couldn't come up with anything other than substantial unrelated third parties. And we just refer to the acronym SUPT. We didn't like that. So for now, it's unrelated third parties. Anyway, within the document, we've defined unrelated third parties, and we've tried to kind of provide some clarification and some refinements to make it a bit clearer. Also, we had some questions about lumping pension funds and CIVs together in a way that maybe gave the impression that we just kind of see them all as just kind of generic investment schemes. And that was not our intention. We acknowledge that there are differences between CIVs and pension funds that we're looking at. So we have added some content around that as well. And then throughout the document, we've taken up your comments, whether they were advanced or whether they were in the board meeting. We tried to take up your comments about refinement, clarity, things like that. So as Gabriella mentioned, please, if you would take a look, we'd love to release this consultation paper by the end of March so that we can get responses back and keep this work stream on target. So if you could take a look, see if there are any fatal flaws in the document that you want to point out to us, and we'll deal with those. I think, and last but not least, of course, we were encouraged to refine the questions to make them less technical, which we believe we have done. There are some that really do apply to the profession, and those will be the people that answer. So I think before we go on to the questions, feedback is the main reason for a consultation paper. That's what we're doing, is we're seeking feedback. So we'll walk you through the questions, but I think back to a comment that Janine made about substance over form. Substance over form. That's so incredibly important because, well, we want to make sure that the questions contain enough substance, sufficient substance to allow the respondents to answer, to properly communicate the question that we're asking. We can wordsmith all day long, but we're really focusing on substance as we go through these questions. So if we can just kind of keep that front of mind, I think that would be great. Also, it's important to note that the questions follow content. So while you're going to be looking at them today, just question by question by question, remember that they're going to follow content, context. So let's keep that in mind as well. Also, we worked with Luigi and Ken yesterday on these questions. So this has been kind of a team effort, and I think we've gotten to a good place. So without further ado, let's go into the questions, please. All right, the first question, which is really more of a general question and comes after section 2, which is about investment scheme structures. You can read it, I'm not going to read it to you. So if you would just take a look at that and give it a moment and let us know if you have any questions or comments on that.
So would third-party providers, is that enough, or should we say service providers?
I think since our focus has been third parties throughout. So I think if we say service providers, some are going to see that as a specific category. I think we want to keep with the text that we use throughout the paper, which is third parties. So I would suggest we stay with third parties because, as I said, we have the content that goes before the question, and it's entitled third-party roles and responsibilities. So I believe that the question flows if you're talking about third-party roles and responsibilities, and then you go in and talk about the third-party providers. We could change it to third parties if it's the provider part that is problematic.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think that Chana's suggestion would be that we would say third-party service providers.
Yeah.
To add service.
Right.
Not remove third parties, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question is just
because otherwise third-party providers, I don't know, it doesn't work for me, but maybe I'll listen to other board members as well.
Well, I think again, the way I look at it is we've talked about third parties all the way throughout, third party providers or third parties throughout. Then to add third party service providers in the question, it seems to me I would look at it and go, why does this say service providers, but nowhere else in the document it says third-party service providers?
No, then you would have to change the document as well.
Okay, so service, add service. All right, there you go. I think, I think we're gonna be able to.
Sorry, Rania and Rich, and many others. Rania, please.
Perhaps you could say a third-party substantial service provider. Because I think that's the whole point, is to, I mean, draw the distinction between third parties and third-party service providers and substantial providers where there is decision. I mean, I think that would capture the.
I think that would be risky because then you have to define substantial and then criteria for them to be substantial. I don't know.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just jump in very quickly here. So Linda, I think what's needed here is a bit of context as to why we're approaching the first question the way we're approaching it, right? So if you or John could explain, and which, like we discussed, is this intended to be a technical question addressed to practitioners, or is it intended to be for a broader audience that we're addressing? So a bit of that context to help the board understand what this is trying to get at and what sort of response we're expecting.
Gosh darn. This question is, as I said, it follows the investment scheme section, which is kind of the opening part of the content of the paper. And it's a general question because we said when we spoke on Monday, we talked about the need for stakeholders beyond the profession to respond to this consultation paper. And therefore, we wanted a question that was general, that would invite them to speak on this particular topic and identify whether there are, maybe there are indirect relationships, or there are other circumstances that we're not aware of that we need to know about when considering this issue of auditor independence and these third parties that we're referring to. So, John, I don't know if you want to add.
Just a minor thing, just also this is before the discussion when we talk more about the substantial aspect of what the service providers can be providing and where we sort of set out that criteria. This is kind of before that, and just, as Linda said, it's more of a general question in terms of whether there's, that general concern about independence or at particular parties.
Thank you, John. Rich, please.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate what was just said, but I don't think this question is asking about that. And I suspect that the answer to this question is always yes, or almost always yes, because there are interest relationships. There's financial interests, there's employment interests, there's family relationship interests, there's business relationships, there's non-audit services that have to be considered. Because some of those third-party providers might already be related entities, and because the code already lays out all those items. So I'm not sure I follow why we're asking for a recitation of what's already in the code if what we're trying to achieve is what we just said there. So I think this question needs some reconsideration. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to what Linda was saying before. So I guess the question is directed at those that may not have a nuanced or understanding of the code, for example, investors or other stakeholders that are not well versed in the code and how the code works around related entities, those sort of aspects. So it's a general question about whether they believe there's a need for independence between those parties and the actual auditor as well. Just to add that context.
Okay. Rich, would it help if we did a specific question for, I don't know, investors or some way to designate this as?
Well, even if you're saying they're not a related entity, when you move to the conceptual framework, it's those same interests you need to talk about. You're asking about what are the interest relationships or circumstances, and I'm not sure that's going to get us useful information. That's my real concern. I think it's going to get us a recitation of what we already know and think about. So that's just how I'm reading the question. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Amajid, please.
So my concern is similar to what Rich just expressed. This becomes too broad to my mind in the sense, earlier we were nudging the people to think what is not covered in the code, and we wanted people to highlight that. Here it becomes too open-ended and also depends on who's actually responding to the question. If it is the auditor, he'll just think about his relationship and maybe whatever, according to his perspective, are the relationships. And other than auditors and third-party providers, people may not even attempt to answer because it's not directed to them as it seems. I think it needs a bit of, I'm still absorbing the question. It needs a bit of rethink.
Can I? Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think through this, because what I'm hearing, and definitely I understand the point. I understand it's a broad question, but as I think through what I'm hearing is I hear it's covered in the code. It's covered with the conceptual framework. Well, okay, and professional accountants know that, but do investors really appreciate that? Do regulators really appreciate that? Are they going to go to the code and look at the conceptual framework to figure out how that works to answer this question? I thought that we were asking these questions so that we could gain feedback from stakeholders other than just PAs to understand whether there is a threat, whether there is a risk with possibly entities that perform significant services for the CIVs. Is there a potential independence threat that might be out there?
Just very quickly, can we maybe give some instances, or can we refer to the instances already covered in the paper and nudge people to think beyond what we don't know? So we say that, look, these are the relationships which we feel are important to be addressed, not covered in the code. Is there anything else that we are missing? So then, I'll be pushed in a direction to think in a particular manner. As of now, it is just very open-ended. Just provide information, and that could be from 0 to 100, anything.
Okay. Thank you, Amajid. David, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually okay with the question broadly. I think two small changes could make it more clear. One is to say, are there interests, and maybe you add the word significant there, because it's really the significant stuff you want to know about, not the immaterial relationships and interests, between the auditor and the audit entity's third-party service providers. So it's not third-party service providers to the auditor themselves, it's to their clients. I think just that small addition makes it much clearer who you're referring to. So that will bring the scope down. And I think to the point that was raised by Amarjeet and Rich, you could also say that you believe are not already covered in the code. And then that way, again, you've scoped it, it's clear, and I think you get exactly what you're asking for. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you, David. Nancy, please.
Thank you. And I'm not going to repeat comments that have already been made. I think starting with Rich, he articulated, I think one of my key concerns is that the question is posed is not going to generate responses that are going to be beneficial to us in terms of evaluating. David's suggestions, I think are very good ones. A couple of other things to consider is I wonder if this is question one or if it's the last question. And I say that because the question is posed, I don't think gives the reader enough information at that point to have adequate context to be able to understand this. And Linda, to your point, we've established independence requirements in Part 4A. I don't think that is the subject of this discussion, and whether or not other stakeholders outside of the public accountants understand that. I think the question is, are there gaps related to these unrelated third parties that need to be somehow addressed? And we're not getting to the gap part of that question, I think, in here. So I think if you take David's suggestions, perhaps consider moving this to the end of, are there any other interests, and I think outside of what's reflected in Part 4A that need to be addressed, then the person who's providing the feedback will have all of that context. I think also with a reference to substantive, one of my comments, and I did share these earlier with staff, but one of my comments was perhaps you refer to paragraph 35, and that may again provide the important context of the types of third-party relationships with the audit client that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Tomoyo, please.
Thank you, Chair. I feel ought to be say service. It's not a service, but it's a duty. So, so service seems to be something to do for good, but it's really a duty that the third party that needs to be covered in this independence review is the third party that owes duty for to act in the best interest of these beneficiary of the CIV or pensions. So service seems to be so it's a bit different from my nuance or whatever. And so isn't it the question to ask who other than the CIVs that needs to be in the scope of this independence assessment, rather than ask what is the kind of relationship interest between the auditor and third party? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomoyo. Mark, please.
So I'm sort of in the same place. I agree with what Amajit said. I also think Nancy's suggestion about moving the question further down in the running order would be a better one, because if I was reading this question as someone completing a response to the consultation, I would say, actually, what do you think, IESBA? Because you already have a view about the application of the conceptual framework and how it works. What we need to do is actually define the gap that we're trying to talk about and ask people what they think should be the applicable requirements there, not what do you think are the general requirements, because otherwise we run the risk of getting a lot of sort of generic responses and not ones that will help us really drill down into the specific question that we want to try and address.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, Linda.
I don't think, Ken, if you have some, I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think I'm hearing that we need to just kind of work on this question more. Ken, thoughts?
No, I just wanted, Tomoyo, I thought you had raised a useful suggestion because what we're addressing here is the entry question into the consultation paper. We're not diving into the technical questions yet, because we want to really open this consultation paper to a broad swath of stakeholders who might be interested in thinking about the issues that we're raising. So what I sort of heard from you, Tomoyo, is more a question along the lines of which sort of third-party providers ought to be included within the scope of the consideration of independence requirements, right? Generally speaking, right? And third-party providers, of course, we can find the right term for it, but it's more about what, in your view, do you think should be the kinds of third-party providers that IESBA should be concerned about when thinking about establishing or clarifying independence requirements for auditors? Was this what you had in mind?
Thank you, Ken. Yes, that is what I thought the starting point. Yes, thank you.
Which to my mind seems it's a very good question. I mean, it's a very open question, and there will be stakeholders who are not, of course, familiar with independence requirements. but asking them generally, given their general understanding of the context of CIVs and who might be associated as third parties with regard to the CIVs, what in their knowledge, their experience, etc., would be their sort of assessment as to which kinds of those related parties we ought to be concerned at from a standard setting perspective. All right, so maybe we'll just hear from the board as to whether that sort of question would be a good sort of entry point question. Again, we're not diving straight into the technical questions, but really just inviting general comments in terms of the scope of the potential provisions we're looking at.
Yes, if I may, that's how I read this question, to be frank. It was like almost more than a question. It was like setting the scene for the questions that are coming after, and somehow responding to something that was discussed here 2 days ago, which was the need to open this consultation paper to others than the ones who know the code well, which is basically the profession. This is a topic that is of high interest, I would say, to investors in general, investors and participants in pension funds and etc. And we should at least try to open these to others and avoid just having technical questions about the code, and things like that. That's how I read this question. I thought it was the response to something that was discussed here about the need to open it more to other investors. So we can rephrase, we can refine, of course, but I think it is more that creating the momentum for the rest of the questions than asking for much information. So, Rania, please.
Yeah, just concerning the terminology. So perhaps, I mean, one suggestion would be, rather than use the term service providers, like management providers. Would that be, or would that be too specific? Because I think that's basically the main concern, is that not just any service providers who are providing sort of a management function. And so I think that would be a nice way to capture a term that really coins the ideas that we're trying, to the concern.
Yeah, I would. My suggestion, Rania, is not to deal with the question of terminology at this point, because in the introduction to the consultation paper, that is what we would do in terms of describing the types of third parties we have in mind, and in effect defining or coining the term we would use for the rest of the consultation paper, including in relation to the questions. So I'd suggest that we don't try to wordsmith the terminology in discussing the questions, but really get a sense from the board as to what the nature of the question should be, because that then will enable us to move forward with the rest of the consultation paper. But the terminology we can address, it is in effect to my mind, it's an editorial matter that we can deal with very, very, very easily.
Sorry, can I just add something there? Just if you use the term management company, for example, it is too narrow, because it would be missing, for example, investment advisors, it could be sponsors, it could be actuaries. Yeah, there's a whole range of different types of third-party providers, not just the management aspect of it. So that would narrow too narrow.
Not management company, but sort of management, because I think the main concern is management functions. So something.
But some of these are not management functions. For instance, the depository does not manage anything; just keeps safeguards or keeps the assets, or the actuary who provides services. So I think that we should keep it as is, and as Ken was saying, try to avoid discussing words here. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. But of course, the comments will be taken on board by Linda.
Yeah, can I just take us back to the paper, because I know you might not all have it in front of you. But again, preceding this question is a section that talks about third-party roles and responsibilities, and the fact that the project team found certain third-party roles to be relevant. I won't go into all of the text. Given the impact of these services have on the investment schemes, the project team is evaluating whether certain interest relationships or circumstances between the auditor and third parties involved. And then it gets into a further description. And then we have the question. So as I mentioned previously, there's content and there's context. So while I do appreciate that there's maybe some still refinement that needs to be done to this question, there is content and context there and all throughout the paper. So, I mean, I think if people are reading this paper in totality, they are going to understand the interest relationships and circumstances we're referring to and the third party providers or service providers that we're referring to. So I just wanted to add that point.
Thank you, Linda. Obichukwu, please.
Thank you. Okay, so on the question number 1, I agree with what Ken and Gabriela said. I believe it's like an opening that sets the pace, that sets the stage for other questions. But I think that we can refine it further. And the suggestion I have is, are there any significant interest, relationships, or circumstances between the auditor and third-party service providers described in paragraph 35 that can impact the independence of the auditor in auditing CIVs, pension funds, and all that? If so, please provide more information. So at least that will now, I think that will marry what we are all trying to say, to channel it to the point where we are going to. What are the interests that impact their independence? So if you're getting that from the point of view of investors and regulators, I think that will be a better way to set up the stage for further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Obichukwu. So Christelle, please.
Yes, I wanted to stress the point that we address ourselves without saying question 1 is for this type of answer of people and etc. So what about the profession that should they just write down the references to the code and if not, they will be considered as not applying rightfully their duties? You see what I mean? It's so vast, so large question that the answer could be a sort of copy paste of the articles of the code or the conceptual principles that they apply in there. So what do we set the scene? I understand what you say, Linda. So it's flowing from something that has been presented before. So either you you narrow, like it was said, maybe it's one of the thing, and you maybe a sort of note to the profession that we don't ask here to answer with what is in the code, because that's not the purpose of the question. You see what I mean? Because it's so vast. So
yeah, can I respond, Christelle? Yeah, I think that's a good point, because we are just saying, are there interests instead of are there other interests? So I think with what I'm hearing, as far as some recommended language, and again with the content that precedes the question, maybe we can refine it to kind of make it clear that are there other interests or other significant interests and all that good stuff, which kind of would hopefully lead the respondent to understand that, all right, we've set out some interest in relationships.
And depending on how you flow with the other question, if you want to have a sort of general purpose question, given that the flow before is about the type of structures, the type of governance, and the type of relationship, maybe the other should be on those 3 aspects. I don't know.
I think we've had that discussion around basically how the question was teed up originally, right? And we have it already on the screen here because it was set up as basically an inquiry into significant interest relationships, etc. And we have received already some suggestion that this question would be better placed at the end in terms of a catch-all, having gone through the consultation paper and having understood a bit of the discussion, are there any other interests, etc., that ought to be covered in the code? So we can deal with that as previously suggested, but I'm just trying to really bring us back to having essentially an introductory question that will get us into the consultation paper for a broad range of stakeholders. And if I were to take Tomoyo's question, which some might perceive to be very broad, but if I were to link this to how we are in effect teeing up the concept of an unrelated third party in the paper, and it's already in the executive's summary, where we, in a sense, we describe what we understand to be potentially those third parties. And the way we describe them is that these are third parties that are responsible for decision-making and operation of the scheme, or B, able to substantially impact the performance, and I'd suggest adding accounting records or financial statements of the scheme. That's how we're teeing up this concept of an unrelated third party. And the question, which I think Tomoyo's, it kind of connects into Tomoyo's suggestion earlier, the question could be to stakeholders, do you agree that as for purposes of this consultation paper, we are looking at those third parties as we have described them? Or do you believe we should consider other third parties that might have other types of influences or roles or whatever? Right, but essentially we've teed it up in how we've described it, and to Amarjit's suggestion earlier, if we can then make it a bit more specific, then instead of asking a very broad question, we would then be asking a narrower question that would, in effect, ask stakeholders to really think about what we're proposing in terms of how we're thinking about these third parties. That could be an entry point. And then we can then describe exactly what we are looking at.
Thank you, Ken. Christelle, do you still want to speak? Okay. Yes, I agree with you. And again, here I will insist a little bit because we need to think about who do we want to respond to this consultation paper. If we are targeting only the profession, okay, we can ask all the questions about the code and the provisions in the code and etc. If we want others to respond, let's be clear. Pension funds people and investment funds people, they don't know the code. So if we don't, even so, I think it's going to be very difficult to have contributions from investors, from CIVs, from pension funds, from etc. It's going to be very difficult. But if we narrow the questions in a way that it's only about the code, what's in the code, what's not in the code, what is necessary to do, and etc., we will be sending a message to the possible respondents like, I mean, this is for the profession. And I think that we all agree that it would be important to have diverse views, because it's not only about the technical application of the code, but also about how the ones who will be impacted by something that we may want to do or not, or whatever, feel that this kind of situations may impact them. So anything that we can do, I don't know if it's this one, if it's something that we may have to redraft, but I would avoid narrowing the scope of the question in ways that immediately takes non-professional accountants out of the consultation. And that's what's going to happen if we start with questions with the code, because they don't know the code. That's the reality. So.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Gabrielle. I just wanted to add to that, because part of the intention behind the question was actually around perception of independence, which is a very important part of independence, is whether you're perceived to be independent. And that's what we were, I guess, trying to capture, is what is their perception about who the auditor should be independent of and why. But yeah, Thank you.
Okay, so
So can I ask, we've been making changes to the question. Does this capture the substance of what we want to ask?
And sorry, I put up two alternative because it sounds like there was a suggestion of maybe putting that other one as a catch-all, the one that's there first as a catch-all at the end of the paper. And the other one was, it needs some wordsmithing, but that was the intention to have that sort of broader question, but we'd probably need to work on that a little bit.
Well, I'd suggested, go ahead, Rich. So my suggestion to the board in relation to the second question on the screen here was not so much to ask what could potentially be seen as a very broad question, what kinds of third-party service providers, but to more start off with saying this consultation paper focuses on certain third-party providers, service providers, that as we describe it, are responsible for decision-making and operation of the scheme, or B, are able to substantially impact the performance, countering record to financial statements of the scheme. Do you believe that's the appropriate focus, or do you believe there should be other considerations IESBA should take into account when thinking about those third parties? Something along those lines.
We do have a question later on that asks that. There's another question that asks that, is this criteria that you just mentioned, is that appropriate, or are there other aspects? There's a question later on in the paper that asks that particular.
So maybe that could be the entry point.
Okay, but that comes before the sort of discussion about what that actually means. That's the only thing. Yeah. If you put it as the entry question, I mean, yeah.
So, any comments or suggestions to the project team in terms of the options put forward? Rania?
So just to understand this, so you're saying that the second question, which is in your view, which kind of, that would be our question 1, then the top question would be the final question. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I think it's good. Yeah.
Okay. There are no disagreements. Chana, please, sorry.
So just following Ken's thinking, because we don't want them to talk about various third-party relationships, could we sort of reference that paragraph in the new question 1 so that it then narrows the ones that they are going to respond to?
Which paragraph would you have in mind?
The one that says that, providing services, management, the financial decision-making, and then the financial statements, because then it sort of narrows.
Yes, that was my suggestion, yes. I mean, we can either set it out within the question itself in terms of the different roles and types of influences, or we can refer to the paragraph that's actually describing it. Yeah. As John says, we have a question that's comes.
Yeah, we do have a question that's specifically asked about the criteria and whether that's appropriate or there's other factors that we should, which is later on, which is,
Yeah,
so this is more, I guess, a broad opening question about what people think, what sort of, providers or interests are related,
So maybe just a suggestion, and maybe Sadia wants to come in, but a suggestion would be maybe to go for the other questions, John or Linda, and then we can circle back to this first question just to see how it flows.
Yeah. And we have Sadia and Sunam. Sadia, please.
So I appreciate the inclusion of described in paragraph 35. I think we are looking at the questions standalone, but there's a paper that already describes some of these. I think it's important also for the reader, and maybe this is something that we do for all the questions, where we've already discussed it, we link back to which paragraph this has been discussed in. On the second one, I just have hesitation on what kind of third-party service providers, because I think it's actually what services they're doing rather than what they're called. So we might want to elaborate on that one.
Thank you, Sadia, for the suggestion. Sunam, please.
I think my comment seems to be similar to Sadia's. In the first paragraph, we talk about significant interest relationship and circumstances. All of a sudden, in the second paragraph, our focus is on third-party service providers, so it doesn't seem to be matching. Okay.
Okay, so is it clear to the team what amendments should be done? And we'll come back to this question at the end. And should we move now to the next question?
Yes, let's. So we'll go through the next few ones in about, what, 5 or 10 minutes? All right, so question 2 is going to fall under the Section 3 application of the code to investment schemes. This section is the one that really speaks to what's in the code already and speaks to the related entity definition and how those relationships would be considered. So what we've done, we did note there were some comments about concerns that we didn't really want to open the door to questions about related entities that are covered in the code because that's already been addressed. So we got rid of some of our questions and we've refined it, and we have one question now, which is question 2. I'll give you a few minutes to read it and comment.
Thank you, Linda. Any comments? Mark, please.
Largely okay with that, Linda, but my one question is that rather than ending with provide reasons for your answer, I think what we're actually interested in is what are their suggestions for any modification of the definition? So rather than leaving it as open as it currently is, could we frame it about, do people have recommendations for how the definition might be changed?
Thank you, Mark. Nancy, please.
I think similar to my concerns expressed about question 1, this gets to, well, what kind of answers are we going to get back from people? And I'm not quite sure really what we're asking here. Is the question that we're asking is, should some of these third-party providers be related entities? I get back to, I think what we're really asking about in general in this paper, not this specific question, is helping us to identify gaps, especially perceived gaps, where for independence with respect to some of these services provided by third parties in the CIV environment. And I just want to make sure that we're really getting the question focused in a way that we're going to get responses back that help us to understand that question. And Gabrielle, I very much appreciate, I don't think our audience is generally PAs for this consultation paper. I think it's outside this. I'm just not sure that this question is necessarily going to get to the answer that is going to be helpful to us. I'm not sure we even need to ask this question. I think that there are other questions that get to this. But I think if you're going to ask a question like this, one, I don't know what we mean by fit for purpose. And I'm not sure that is going to be clear enough to the audience to really be able to give you a meaningful answer. And I'm not sure I have a great suggestion as to, because I think my preference would be to delete the question, but I think if you're going to ask the question, I think really be specific. This is not, in my mind, a general question. It's a very specific question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, Actually, I think that this question, personally, I think that it is needed because it's about what we are looking for. This is exactly the objective of this project, which is to understand if the code's definition of related entities captures these third parties. So, but responding, can I make a suggestion to somehow address Nancy's comment, which is to delete is fit for purpose in capturing and just leave it, sorry, captures. Do you believe that the code's definition of related entity captures all relevant parties, blah, blah, blah? It's more direct, more obvious what we are speaking about, what we are asking. Would it help, Nancy? Okay.
Yes, I think that was if you're going to keep it in, let's make it very clear what we're asking.
Okay, I
Thank
think
you.
that way it's yes or no. I mean, and the reasons for that. Okay, thank you, Nancy and Mark. Chana, please.
And can we be direct and get rid of beliefs, people's beliefs? Is the code's definition of related entity, be direct in the question?
Yeah, it does.
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 Yeah,
It does.
does.
Definition.
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
Nancy, do you still want to speak? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so agreed? Let's move forward.
All right. Now we're going to go on to section 4, application of the code to unrelated. Oh, I'm so sorry. Obichuam, go. Yeah.
Sorry, Obichukwu, I hadn't seen you. Please.
Okay, thank you. So on that question too, personally, I'm not very comfortable with it because the code is principle based and definitely it's not going to capture everything that relates to everything. But if the spirit of the code or the essentiality of that section addresses CIVs, then the code is fit for purpose. So to say, does the code definition of related entity capture all relevant parties? Definitely will not capture it because it's principle based. We are not prescriptive, writing one by one. So I think that when people answer these questions, I don't think it's I think they're definitely going to say no because it doesn't capture all relevant parties. It's not prescriptive, it's principle based. So there's no place that we wrote every relevant or significant party. So I'm feeling that there should be more modification to this because it's a principle based code. So thank you.
Thank you, Abi.
Sorry, just to address that. So the section before it goes through the definitions of related entities, and that they are quite specific. They're not principle based as such. They actually set out specifically around what is a related entity, whether it controls, whether there's significant influence, etc. So it's not a principle based aspect. But also the other thing which we discussed on Monday was that those definitions and that aspect of the code was really developed for sort of, I guess, normal operating companies, for a better word, rather than these types of structures. So that's what the question is trying to address, is whether that is actually capturing the right or relevant entities with respect to these investment schemes, which are different in terms of structurally. Yep.
Yeah, and if I might add as well, Obichiko, this is a definition that we're addressing. So it does need the degree of specificity that needs to be in the definition so that practitioners can apply the code provisions as intended. Even though elements of the definition itself would be principles-based, but the definition needs to be very specific.
Okay, thank you, Ken, Obichukwu, and all. Back to you, Linda, John.
Okay,
Nina?
yeah, so fine. So we're going into section 4, which is the application of the code to unrelated third parties. This is really kind of the meat of the issue and what we want to, understand from this consultation paper. So this section speaks to unrelated third parties, explains what they are, goes into the specific, the two main characteristics that we're focusing on. And then we come down to the questions. So there are 4 questions in this section. And the section starts out with this header that's in bold to kind of help the respondents hone in on what we're looking at. We're looking to see, we're referring to this criteria in question 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you could please take a look at question 3 and provide us with your feedback.
Thank you, Linda. Comments, questions, suggestions? Well, it seems that everyone is fine.
So I was just going to say, Ken, this is the question I was referring to, which is, asking
Yes,
about that.
my suggestion would be to add references to the preparation of accounting records of the financial statements, because it's essentially that has to be core to what we're looking at. So it's not just about substantial impact on the performance, but also any party that would have an influence on the preparation of the accounting records of financial statements.
I'm not sure I understand question 3. I mean, what do you mean by, do you believe these criteria set out above are sufficient, or should other factors are sufficient for what? Just if you can.
Yeah, so.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, you go.
I'll start, you can finish. So yeah, it's what we've got in bold are the criteria for determining what the scope is, what the unrelated third parties are that we're looking at. So are they responsible for decision-making and operation of the scheme? And then do they substantially affect its performance with respect to the accounting records and financial statements? So we're really focused on that. So we want to know, we're asking people, are these adequate? Do these cover the issue of what these unrelated third parties are doing? Or are there other factors that need to be considered? Have we captured it in a nutshell?
Yeah.
So, sorry, I'll just add a little bit to that. So what we're not trying to capture every single unrelated third party, because there are some, like we've talked about, that might be providing routine mechanical type services that we don't consider would be necessarily because we wouldn't want to scope everything in, because there are some that are just providing sort of like marketing, or it might be administrative services, or just like processing transactions, or those sorts of things. That's not really what we're interested in. And that's why we set out these criteria where they have a significant impact on the organisation in terms of its performance, its decision-making, its operation. So we don't want to try and capture everything, because that would be going well beyond the scope of what, So that's what we're asking, is whether, for want of a better word, is that the right threshold? Like if it's...
I get your point. And my only, I think what I find a bit vague is when you say are sufficient, my suggestion would be sufficient for what? Because, I mean, I can understand this question if I relate it back to the previous draft that you had shared with us, but somebody that is not familiar with that draft, I'm not sure they would get the objective of the question. So just perhaps maybe add a phrase after sufficient for independence considerations, or for just to clarify what your objective from this question, like are sufficient as a threshold for.
Yeah, we understand. We understand your point.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, please.
I was going to say, I think you can do that if you just insert after sufficient to define the CIVs stroke pension funds within scope. And I think that probably deals with Rania's point.
Sorry, Mark, can you say that again?
Yeah, so just insert to define the CIVs and pension funds within scope.
But it's not the CIVs, Mark, it's the third parties that we're looking at. So it's,
Okay, David Ray, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, and Ken, it's something you said that actually just brought this up for me. In Part B, so the existing definition where it says substantially affect its performance, do we define somewhere what kind of performance, like operational performance, financial performance? I just wanted to point of clarity because when I read that question, my question would be, well, what kind of performance do we mean?
no, I don't believe we define the concept of performance in the consultation paper itself. It should be the financial performance.
Okay.
Not the operational performance.
So maybe we should just specify that. I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, David, Ken. So with this, I think we can move to the next one.
So, okay, we're moving on to question 4. Again, the header of this for this question is very important. So anyway, question 4, I'll let you read and make comments.
I understand the background of this question, but from the perspective of respondents, I think they are experiencing difficulties in figuring out how to respond. What type are these type common in your jurisdiction? Then explain your response. So how can I respond on these questions? So I think first one, location of this question seems to be a little bit awkward. Then the question is not too much specific from the perspective of respondents. Thank you.
If I can just explain the intent, I don't know if that'll help or not, but we're really trying to look at, I think the pervasiveness to help us understand whether there really is a threat, a gap, a risk, something that we need to deal with. So that was kind of the intent of the question is, first of all, are these common? You know, are they common? If they're not within the jurisdiction, then, and if everybody answers, which we know that's not going to be the case, but if everybody answers they're not common in the jurisdiction, then there's no risk, no threat. So we're really just trying to get an understanding of how, like it says, how common are these in your jurisdiction so we understand the magnitude. I don't know if anybody.
May I ask you, something? I think that the responses that we will get about the third parties, I suspect that they will be considerably consistent, that the third parties that we are considering are more or less the same everywhere. And if there is something strange that comes, I think that we would be able, without asking this question, to understand how relevant it is. Also because limiting it to the jurisdiction, I think it's very difficult because most of these CIVs, or many of them, work globally or transnationally or whatever. They may use some third party somewhere and not in other places and etc. So I'm not sure that this question will help us a lot. I think that we ourselves will be able to assess the relevance and the importance and the impact of some unrelated third party without asking this question. So I mean, unless you feel strongly about the need of having it, I would
delete it.
Delete it. But of course, if the board is comfortable. Okay. So next question.
All right, question 5. All right, there we go.
Linda Obichukwu.
Sorry for the delay. Okay, I'm just thinking through the flow of these questions, and I'm thinking that there's a bit of disconnect. Like if you're starting with the number 1 question we had, I feel that there's a disconnect. But when you get to number 3, that number 3 appears to be what should be number 1. When you are defining the related parties, do you have does this criteria capture all the related parties, or is there some others that we have not considered before we now start asking about the jurisdiction? But we are deleting it, so that's okay. But I'm feeling that that number 3 should be number 1, not number 3. Thank you.
Yeah, and I definitely understand the point. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on this.
No,
It's
we
a
said
fair-
we said we would look at the
Yeah.
flow, Linda, once we've gone through all the questions.
Right.
So I'd suggest we go for the rest of the questions
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
we'll come back.
Fine, come back to that, yeah. All right, so yeah, we have question 5 on the screen, if anybody has any feedback on that.
Hector, please.
Just a question. This is meant to be responded by practitioners because you have, I think, question 7 or 8 directed to regulators. Is this in your practice? Has the conceptual framework been enough to deal with the problems, or is it a general question? Because if it is to practitioners, maybe we should say it would be, I'm thinking about a regulator, and responding to this might be in a different position.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Hector. Thank you. You're right. It is probably more aimed at practitioners, but I just, speaking as a former regulator, we would be aware of Section 120 of the code because we regulated the profession and therefore we needed to know the audit standards, the ethics standards. So on this one, I think, yeah, you're right. We did kind of specify in a later question. On this one, I think it's probably safer to leave it open. So those that are aware of it can answer. Those that aren't, then they don't have to reply. Is that okay? Okay.
Sorry, can I just say as well, just the preceding discussion does go through the application of the code and and it sort of explains how it works. So even if you don't know, you still can get a sense of how it works and whether you think that is sufficient for that purpose. It might not be as astute an answer, but there is still, like, even if, yeah, does that make sense?
Thank you, John and Linda. Janine, please.
I have a question. When I looked at the question and also some other questions later on, I was thinking, would it also maybe be a good if you would get also input on how respondents think about the application of the conceptual framework in terms of consistency in practice, so that in the same kind of situations, different auditors would come to the same conclusion and would apply it in a consistent way in terms of behaviors and whether or not to have an independence issue or to see an independence issue. And also whether the consultation paper should maybe also ask a question whether there are some of these third parties, unrelated third parties, that respondents would think that there should be a clear prohibition, because the conceptual framework is not about prohibiting. You have these. It could be that in the end, an auditor should come to the conclusion it's not okay to be the auditor, but you can also, of course, implement measures. And in practice, that that is also, yeah, two different auditors in the same situation could come to two different conclusions or different measures, or one may be saying, I cannot do this audit, and others saying, oh yes, I can do it. So maybe there is also some room for some further questions in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Linda?
I mean, yeah, I think that's a fair point. I do, I would love to hear from the team on this one, because my first thought is, yeah, perhaps there is a need to identify or ask about possible prohibited services. So yes, so everybody is all on the same page about those that are truly a threat. And I think that's important. But then, of course, the other side of me says, but then do we have to worry? Because there is so much diversity around the world. Are there potential consequences to doing that? So I'm thinking through that, but I think it's a fair point.
Maybe I'll jump in here. And Janine, I mean, I understood your comments to be more raising a suggestion as to whether we should be asking about consistency of application of the code prohibitions, and in particular the application of the conceptual framework. Because if that's the case, we can certainly ask that. And to my mind, this would be more a question addressed to regulators as they consider the provisions in the code, and they make an assessment as to whether, as they see it, whether they would believe those provisions would be capable of being consistently applied. Is that your...
Yeah, that could be a question. But also I think the prohibition is also important, because for users, they could or investors, they could maybe have the idea that some things were already prohibited and are sort of surprised by looking at a conceptual framework that would apply in these kind of situations. Because often it's not always that investors also understand all these things that we have in the code, for auditors to consider their whether there are independent threats and so on. So I think both things are important in my view, but for you to consider, you're the board. I'm only observing, and but I think it's in the public interest to get input on that, because it also then informs you better to think about any next steps based on the responses you get.
Yeah, if I could just add to that as well, I'm thinking through the issue, and the non-PAs responses are going to be kind of colored by what they know in their jurisdiction. So in their jurisdiction, a certain service may be a prohibited service, and they may think that that's how it is for everybody. But I think it's important to get that message out and to get feedback on whether there might be prohibited services that they thought were global, but really it's just in their jurisdiction. So I think that's an interesting point. I would like to add it, but others.
Is the board in agreement with this proposed addition? Okay, let's take silent as agreement. Thank you.
So we'll add that one. We'll work on the wording.
Thank you. So
question 6. All right, let's move along to question 6, please. I'll give you a moment to read it and invite feedback.
any comments? David, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the question that comes up to mind for me is, if so, do you believe the clarification should be made through amendment to the code or development of NAM? If we're talking a wider audience that's non-professional, they won't understand what that means and the implications to that. So maybe we need to think about what the suggestion would be, and then we can figure out whether it needs to be NAM or it needs to be a code amendment. Because honestly, I just don't see them knowing that.
So your suggestion is that something is added to this question to better explain what it means to apply the conceptual framework?
No, it's, so the second question is, if so, do you believe this clarification should be made through amendment to the code or development of NAM? What I'm saying is that a respondent won't know the difference between a code amendment versus NAM and what the implication to that is.
So David, I think based on your comment, it could just be as simple as, do you believe further clarification is needed or something? So just getting rid of the through amendment of the code and okay, fine, thank you.
Thank you. Sunam, please.
Yeah, further to that, my suggestion would be as follows. If you responded no to question 5, how do you believe further clarifications to be made? For instance, and in parentheses, amendment to the code or an NAM. That's my thought, my suggestion. How do you believe further clarification should be made?
Okay, thank you, Sunam. Any other comments? Okay, so let's move.
Can I add something?
Sorry, Chana.
I don't know, I'm sort of supportive of David's comment because, I mean, if clarification is needed, then the board can determine which way to proceed. So I think that decision can be made later once the information comes through. So I'm more supportive of David's suggestion to get rid of the second part of the question.
So sorry, you get rid of the after the question mark, you're saying, so no, like we need to ask for some sort of explanation, I'm assuming, rather than a yes, no.
So I would say keep the explanation, but just delete the question around, do you think it should be a code amendment or a NAM amendment? Because they won't know.
So
So that's something we decide later.
Like it is now, is that?
Leave the last sentence, right?
Yeah,
Please
strike
provide.
keep the please provide your reasons. So delete through amendment all the way to material period.
So it's
undelete.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, Chana?
No, I think what David is saying.
Yeah, keep that last bit.
Keep the last bit, please provide. Yeah, please provide.
Okay. Yeah.
No pressure.
But are you saying, sorry, you're saying delete the middle part though, all of that, if so, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Christelle, please.
I'm just assessing if that answers to my questions. Because why do we have 2 questions? Why isn't it just the end of the question 5? If you answer no, give something. You see what I mean? Here I'm a bit. Well, I don't know.
I mean, I think if there
it's
is a
useful or
feeling
not.
that might work well, I think that there is no problem in merging question 5 and question 6 as it is now.
Yeah,
Right?
I don't see any problem with merging
Okay,
it.
good. Rania, please.
Yeah, very much in line with Christelle's point. I think, I mean, it could be that, I mean, assuming we kept the 2 questions separate, it could be that I think the code is clear, or that this is how I would interpret it, but I still think that it could warrant some further clarification so that it is more consistently applied. You get my point? So I would take out if you answered no, or I just basically merge the 2 questions, like, do you think additional clarification is warranted? Because it could be that this is how I interpret the code, but I think that perhaps another practitioner might interpret it differently, such that it is not actually applied consistently.
John, can you please show how it looks like after the merge, so that the merge of question 6 with question 5?
So what I'm trying to say basically is that it doesn't have to be a yes or no answer. It could be that the conceptual framework does provide guidance, which is probably the case, but it is not that clear such that everybody would interpret it the same way, perhaps. So just leave room for that possibility. And
while John's making the change, can I just say that when we look at question 5, it's really talking about clarity. So is section 120 of the code clear? So some people may say, yes, it's fine. Then some may say no. So if they're answering no, then we go into if you responded no to the question. So it seems to kind of flow, I think, once we get this merged together.
What I'm saying is that, I mean, perhaps it's not just yes or no. There could be like, different shades of gray in between.
So,
And
Rainer, would it address your concern if we were to add the word sufficiently before clear?
Yeah, or sufficiently clear for consistent application, perhaps, or.
Well, we can deal with Johnny's suggestion about consistency as an additional question, but but to your point, there are different shades of gray. So if we were to say sufficiently clear, then respondents will be able to elaborate.
Or just take out if you responded no, and to Christelle's point, which is basically to merge the two questions, do you think that additional clarification is warranted in this regard? I'm just.
I mean, I think that's fine. I think somebody, if they read question 5, do you think it's clear? Yes, no, whatever. But you can still go into, do you believe application? Yeah, I think it's fine. I don't think we need if you responded no.
Yeah, I think so, because the response to the first question is a yes or no. Is it sufficient or is it not sufficient? If it's sufficient, there are no other problems that we need to address here. If there is not sufficient, it might be that the conceptual framework could still give a response, and then we need to have feedback on the respondents.
Right.
But just if they think that responding to the first part of the question, that it's not sufficiently clear. So I think it flows well, Rania, because otherwise we risk having people saying, yes, it's sufficiently clear, but we would like to add a few words or a few flowers or whatever. So it's just to narrow the second part of the question to those cases where respondents consider that the conceptual framework is not sufficiently clear, right? Linda, is that?
I was actually okay with taking it out. I mean,
taking out what?
If you responded no, so just take out if you responded no to question 5. Or if not, I mean, there's if not. I mean, it's up to the group.
Well, if not, it's I think it's the same as if you responded no, but if you like it more, I'm fine.
There you go. Okay, thank you.
The less words, the better.
Now I can read it. I know that's what I was thinking. In the interest of brevity, do we go with just, do you believe the application of the conceptual warrants additional clarification? Because honestly, you may say, yes, it's clear. However, there might be something more that could be done. I mean, shall we remove? So just, do you believe? Yeah, take out if not.
Ken, did you want to say something?
Well, I thought that if not is a part of the logical construct, right?
Well, it is. It definitely is. But then it also, I mean, to me, this opens it up to a broader audience, because if not means that only the people that feel like it's not clear can respond. But I guess my thought is there could be people out there that think it's clear, but maybe they would prefer additional clarification. So it opens it up to a broader audience. That's my thought.
But yeah,
I'm not bothered either way.
Let's not complicate it.
It's fine.
Because your first question is a yes/no question.
Yeah.
That's because if you want to address it in a different way, then you need to change the first question, and which is what I'm saying.
That's fine.
I mean, we're in danger of over-engineering the question.
Yep.
It's a yes or no, and if it's a no, then you ask, do you believe there's any
Okay,
foundation of
fine.
clarification?
Okay, we've added if not. Okay?
Okay,
Okay.
fine. David, please.
Just one small comment, because I feel like we're risking running into a run-on series of questions now because we've combined two pretty substantial questions into one. Can we perhaps on structure do it as a sub-question so it breaks it a little bit and allows the thought and the understanding of the respondent rather than a series of questions in a paragraph, which they could easily get lost with?
Agree. Linda, John, is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. We'll think about how
No,
to.
it's just breaking it into
Yeah.
a sub-question.
Then it kind of goes back to question 5 and 6. I mean,
No, within the first question, you just put it on in your line, that's all.
oh, yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's easy.
Okay, so agreed. Let's move. I'd ask the board members to be as focused as possible and try to avoid, again, too much discussion around words because we are getting really late, and we risk not being able to reach the end of this discussion because we need to. There are people waiting, right? IESBA. So, Linda, please.
Fine. Thank you very much, Chair. All right, here we are, question 7, which is the last question that we had. Please read.
Amajit, please.
Very quickly, what is the intention here? Are you seeking amendments to the legislative requirements? And if so, my question as a regulator would be, since when should I capture those amendments? Or are you actually seeking not just the amendments, you just want to know what is the legislative position with respect to the issue flagged in the question? So I think some basic clarity is required here.
Thank you, Amajit. Paul, please.
Thank you. I think it's just one of those, once again, we're mixing which code are we talking about? Because we're addressing about their national frameworks environment. So we can't be saying the code. What are we referring to?
I think we have set out in the paper that code, capital C, refers to the IESBA code. So we got, Paul, to your question, we did have some comments about confusion around jurisdictional code and the code. So that's why we refined this question, got rid of another question, so that what we're referring to here is the IESBA code, which has been, like I said, code capital C is the IESBA code.
Sorry, just the nature of the question is asking a jurisdiction, the regulator or the standard setter, whether a change, an amendment to the code in your jurisdiction, they would never change the code in their jurisdiction. It's about their tools. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, I understand your question. So thinking back to my previous job, so we would have jurisdictional amendment. We would adopt the code as written, but then we may add jurisdictional amendments to deal with specific issues that were relevant to that jurisdiction. So that's really kind of what we're looking at. So I don't know if maybe the wording is confusing, and then of course any other legislative or regulatory requirements, but that's really what we're looking at is, have you, assuming that you have adopted the code, have you made some changes to deal with these issues?
I think that Paul's point is about the context of the question, which I
Right.
think is perceived as being different as the other questions where we make reference to the code.
Right.
Because here we are making reference to legislative regulatory requirements, and it may create some confusion. If I'm reading well and I see some people, nodding, so maybe we could here add IESBA code or whatever. And I have one comment on my side. Why for regulators or jurisdictional standard setters? I assume that they will be the ones responding, but there are many other questions where we assume that it's going to be the profession responding, and we don't say for the profession. Also, you ask about legislative regulatory requirements specific to CIVs and pension funds and auditor independence. And these regulatory requirements may indirectly or even directly come from other frameworks about which CIVs, pension funds may want to also provide information. So I don't see, unless there is something that I'm not seeing, the need to narrow the question in terms of saying that it's only for regulators and jurisdictional standard setters. Does it help you
Well, the
to have
reason-
this reference?
Yeah, the reason we did that was so as to not open it up to everyone and where they wouldn't necessarily be aware and then feel that they had to, for example, research it or whatever. But could we change it just to say, are you aware of, or something to that effect? So just to,
That's going to be the case for many of the questions with respect to investors and regulators and etc., who are not aware of about the conceptual framework and etc. So I'll leave it open, and whoever has information can provide. Rich, please.
Yeah, actually, the 3 points just made by Amarjeet, Paul and Gabriella are all part of what I had. I think you just need to, they can't amend the IESBA code. So have they made some amendment locally? Get those words right. And then to Amarjeet's point, tell us if you have local legislation, regulation that addresses CIV's pensions, not have you amended that. And to Gabriella's point, I came at it similar to what she had, but with one addition. I wouldn't limit this to regulators and jurisdictional standard setters, because my recollection of what I've seen in past responses is there are often a lot of standard setters, jurisdictional standard setters and regulators who don't respond. And therefore others who may have the knowledge may respond, and we are trying to capture the population of knowledge. So that would be part of why I wouldn't limit it also. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Sadia, please.
I'll be brief. I think we can also just ask for guidance as well. So it might have not been an amendment or legislation, but there might be guidance on this topic.
Okay. Thank you for the suggestion. Any other comments?
This is
Linda?
good. No, this
Donna,
is,
are you fine with this?
I think we're okay. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Okay, so this was the last question, right? Do we want to come back to the first one, Ken, or?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm conscious we do have some IESBA, some staff members from IESBA who are online, waiting for the presentation on the IESBA's fraud project, ISO 240. And they do have a hot stop at 11:15. So my suggestion, Chair, would be perhaps to take a pause here and to allow staff maybe to take a break after the IESBA presentation to just sort out our, and then we can come back with some suggestions as to the flow.
Okay, Ken, this is a good suggestion. So we would immediately move to the next, we pause this topic, but we move immediately without breaks or pauses to the IESB presentation. And then we'll take a break and the project team will come back with their suggestions. Okay? Okay, thank you very much. So online, and I apologize. I apologize, Jasper and Angelo, for the delay, but this discussion was unexpectedly longer than we could anticipate. So my apologies for that. And thank you very much for making yourself available to join the IESBA board this morning with an update on your project on fraud. And without further words, I'm gonna hand over to you, Jasper, I believe. Angelo, I don't know who of you is gonna present, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriele. I think that Carla is first starting this presentation off, and then Angelo and I will come in later.
Yes, thank you, Jasper. So welcome everyone to the session on IESBA coordination. We have a session today to quickly give you an update where this work stream's been working on. To remind the board, we have Sunam, who's the current board liaison to this work stream. And how this work stream works is we have a framework that we work towards. This framework's been in place since 2018. It dictates the criteria for coordination, the process in terms of how we capture some of this discussion, and that is reflected in the workbook. I'll quickly go through the coordination activities that we had in Q1 at the liaison level. Sunam and I and Ken had a call with the IESB liaison members, who's Greg Sholem and Kalina, and we discussed the matters that has come up for coordination needs that is not specifically project related. I see in front of you, we listed the various projects that we had discussion about, and you've had the updates on firm culture and governance and CIV over the last few days. And since the last board update on this coordination workstream, we had a presentation from Julie Curran in June 2023 when the fraud standard came about and was about to go for exposure. So today we have the privilege of IESB staff members who's been working on this project to give us an update on how this project is going. Yes, Angelo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Gabriella, for the opportunity to speak to your board. For those who don't know me, I'm Jasper van den Hout, and I'm a director at the IESB, and also I'm also overseeing the fraud project. So together with Angelo, I'll provide you with a high-level overview today of the fraud project. So the topics we will discuss is the timeline of the project, the project objectives, the 7 key areas where we are changing auditor behavior, and then some key proposed revisions in only certain areas, and the areas we selected are those that link most to the standards that you're setting. It is high level given the time that we have, but I hope that it will give you an idea that what we have been doing on this project. So if we can go to the next slide. So this project started in 2020, and we started this project together with a project to revise our going concern standard. And this project was driven by corporate scandals and also failures. And there on these corporate scandals and failures, there were questions about the role of the auditor. And that's why we started this project. We did a very thorough information gathering. We issued, among other things, a discussion paper. And we had throughout the project, we did outreach with key stakeholders. And we're thinking of key stakeholders like its monitoring group members, firms, and also investors. And for investors, we did specific outreach on the changes that we are proposing to the auditor's reports and to get their views on it. And I think we spoke to over 20 investors specifically on these changes. Also, throughout this process, we of course liaised with IESBA staff, and the coordination really focused on identifying possible coordination issues and then, of course, to resolve them. And I think we succeeded at that. I thought the coordination worked very well for this project. So what you can see as well on this slide, we're expecting to approve the standard next week in our board meeting. If you can go to the next slide. And this slide highlights the 4 public interest objectives that we're trying to address. So I'll go through those, and in the coming 2 slides after these, Angelo will go further detail in how we address those public interest objectives. So the first objective that we had is to clarify the role and responsibilities of the auditor for fraud in an audit. So here what we're thinking about is that in Extent 240, it really focused more on the inherent limitations. So stakeholders noted that it was too much focusing on that. So it was too much focusing on what the auditor could not do instead of what the auditor could do. And therefore this objective is trying to clarify really what are the roles and responsibilities for the auditor. And the second objective is to promote a consistent behavior and to facilitate effective responses to identified risk of material misstatement due to fraud. This is a very broad objective that we had. And in several areas, we focused on to address this objective. So I will highlight 3 for you. The first one was around the risk assessment. It's having a more robust risk assessment for the auditor. A few years ago, we revised our risk assessment standard, ISO 315. And based on that, we made further changes to align the risk assessment in our fraud standard with the changes that we were making then. So The other area, the second area, is to clarify really the linkages between ISA 240, so our fraud standard, and other standards. So if you look at the standard, how this standard is built up, it basically builds on a lot of the other standards that the IASB has issued. It's kind of a layer over it, and it adds a fraud lens to these other standards. So we also, in clarifying the linkage to other standards, we did it, of course, with, I just mentioned, our risk assessment standard, ISO 315, but we also clarified the linkage between this standard and our standard on non-compliance with laws and regulation, which is ISO 250. So we, throughout the objective of this here was to clarify the linkages. Then the third one was to strengthen, the third part of this objective was to strengthen the requirements related to fraud or suspected fraud when it is identified, because extant ISA 240 didn't have a lot on that, and stakeholders noted that more guidance was needed there, and guidance and requirements, of course, were needed there. Then we go to the third objective, that is to reinforce the importance of the appropriate exercise of professional skepticism. And we recognize that it's especially being skeptical is critical when dealing with fraud, because it's often, of course, not obvious. So you need to look for signs and then to connect the dots. So therefore we added this third objective, emphasizing that. Then the fourth objective that we have, and that was included in the project proposal, was to enhance the transparency on fraud-related procedures. This has two side objectives. One is to strengthen the communications with those charged with governance, and here you can think of the more timely communication, and also the importance of two-way communication. So those were things that we were proposing to address. And then the other one is an important one, is to strengthen the reporting requirements in ISO 240. And of course, then in other relevant ISOs. This was an area where we had a lot of discussions about. And this is also the area where we did outreach with stakeholders, investors on, to get their views on how we can strengthen the reporting requirements. And with that, I will hand it over to Angelo, and Angelo will guide you through more of the actions, what we did.
Yeah, thank you, Jasper. Good morning, everybody. Jasper, maybe give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I've been having computer problems. Okay, that's perfect. All right, so next slide, please. Okay, with this slide, I wanted to take us back all the way to March 2023. This is where the Fraud Task Force met with the Consultative Advisory Group, and which advised the board to distill the essence of what it was aiming to achieve in revising ISA 240. So they essentially recommended that the board focus its messaging on how it intends to achieve the following objective. It's actually, incidentally, one of the objectives that Jasper highlighted in an earlier slide with a slight tweak to it. So it's promoting consistent practice and changing auditor behavior. So why? Why is this the key objective of the project? Well, during the project proposal phase, stakeholders emphasized that the need to enhance consistency of fraud-related procedures and audits. But they also made it clear in their discussions with the board, in the feedback to the board, that consistency alone was not enough, that these revisions needed to drive meaningful changes in auditor behavior to strengthen fraud risk assessment and response. So this slide that you see up here has really encapsulated the board's distillation of its approach. And really, it's become emblematic of the project. This is a slide that we use to every time we explain the major goals of the fraud project. So at the top of the slide, you'll see that there's reinforcing the importance of professional skepticism throughout the audit, as this is a driver of both consistent practice and behavioral change. I'll come back to professional skepticism on the next slide. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see enhanced audit documentation requirements, which is another critical area to support the objective. And then in the center of the slide, we've got 5 key focus areas that were determined to be pivotal by the board to achieve this objective. The first one is clarifying and emphasizing the auditor's responsibilities. Jasper touched on the fact that the board sought to emphasize what the auditor can do rather than what the auditor can't do, which was a common criticism of the existing standard, of the extant standard. Again, I'll come back to responsibilities in the next slide. This is a key area of intersection between our boards, and I wanted to make sure we give it a little bit of time. Number 2, we have enhancing ongoing communications with management and those charged with governance. The proposed standard really strengthens the requirements for fraud-related communications throughout the audit. This underscores the importance of communication in fulfilling the auditor's fraud-related responsibilities. Number 3, and Jasper touched on this a little bit too, on the risk assessment. This was in fact enhanced. There was a fraud-specific lens that was superimposed on what is the auditor's risk assessment. And this involves including understanding each of the 5 components of internal control, including the entity's control environment, for example. And you'll have things like the entity's culture, management's commitment to ethical values. And there was also the addition of a required understanding of the whistleblower program, which research has shown us plays a very pivotal role in detecting fraud. Number 4, enhancing the auditor's response when fraud or suspected fraud is identified. Now, the proposed standard emphasizes that auditors should pause and reassess their audit approach when fraud or suspected fraud is identified. This is really a critical moment where professional skepticism comes into particularly sharp focus, and it influences the quality of the auditor's judgments. I'll come back to fraud or suspected fraud in the next slide. And then again, to just not to repeat too much of what Jasper said, there was a big effort to increase the transparency of the auditor's report along the lines of key audit matters related to fraud. So to sum up, this slide really does encapsulate the board's overall approach for targeting consistent practice and driving auditor behavior, both in execution and in mindset. Next slide, please. Okay, with this slide, we thought we'd drill down just a little bit, recognizing that we don't have a lot of time, but we thought we'd get into some areas that we thought would be of particular interest to the IESBA as an ethics standards setting board. So the first area, as I mentioned in the previous slide, is this clarifying the auditor's responsibilities related to fraud. Now, this focus that we had in extant on what the auditor can't do, and this focus on inherent limitation was leading to a lot of confusion. So what the board did, excuse me. So what the board did is it elevated the auditor's responsibility in the fraud standard to come before the descriptions of management's responsibilities and the responsibilities of those charged with governance. This was meant to ensure that the auditor's role is not overshadowed and that it's clearer. Another key change in this area was decoupling the description of the auditor's responsibilities from the inherent limitations. In the extant standard, the auditor's responsibilities were described in the same paragraph as inherent limitations, and this was leading to a lot of confusion. These concepts have now been decoupled and separated and are treated separately in the proposed standard. And then finally, a statement was introduced in the proposed standard that inherent limitations of an audit do not diminish the auditor's responsibilities related to fraud, which is what? It's to plan and perform an audit to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements as a whole are free of material misstatement due to fraud. Okay, the second area is strengthening the exercise of professional skepticism. Clearly, professional skepticism is a cornerstone of ethical and high-quality auditing. The board strengthened this area by doing a few things. It introduced the key concept that professional skepticism supports the quality of auditors' judgments throughout the audit. This direct link between judgments and professional skepticism reinforces the importance of maintaining professional skepticism throughout the audit. It also added a requirement that auditors need to remain alert throughout the audit for two things, for additional fraud risk factors that perhaps haven't been uncovered yet or haven't been considered and assessed, And then also for information about circumstances that may be indicative of fraud or suspected fraud. This was intended to reduce the risk that fraud risk factors or fraud or suspected fraud itself could be potentially overlooked. And then finally, there was the references to past experience of the auditor relating to honesty and integrity of management and those charged with governance were removed from the standard. So the board concluded that auditors should approach each audit with a fresh pair of eyes, free from biases or assumptions that could otherwise undermine the exercise of professional skepticism. And finally, the third area we wanted to flag for you is again, the work effort that's been strengthened on fraud or suspected fraud, when fraud or suspected fraud is identified. This is perhaps one of the most significant enhancements that you'll see in the standard. So the revisions include now a separate section that lumps all of these requirements together. Certainly there were requirements on fraud, suspected fraud in the previous standard, but these are now all lumped together. And this structured approach enhances consistency on how auditors handle such situations. The proposed standard also clarifies that the engagement partner and not the engagement team is responsible for determining the effect of any identified fraud or suspected fraud on the overall audit approach. So this shift is meant to ensure that there's greater accountability at the leadership level of the audit engagement for key decisions when critically important fraud or suspected fraud is identified during the audit. And finally, the proposed standard has formalized a link between fraud or suspected fraud and non-compliance with laws and regs, aka NOCLAR. So the proposed standard requires that the auditor treat fraud or suspected fraud as in fact an instance of NOCLAR. And this means that the auditor also has responsibilities under different standards, including ISA 250, but also, and critically importantly, the auditor also has incremental ethical requirements, including those under the IESBA Code of Ethics, depending on which code of ethics applies, of course, in the relevant jurisdiction. So that concludes our speaking remarks. We're happy to take questions, and we'll open it up here.
Thank you very much, Jasper and Angelo, for the presentation and for this opportunity for the IESBA board to ask some questions or make some comments on your project once you are very, very close to the approval finalization. It is very good for us to understand the impacts that this may have on the IESBA work and IESBA standards. And it's also very good to see that there was very good collaboration coming here. So I'm now opening the floor for board questions, comments to Angelo and Jasper. Christelle, please.
I have a question on your last statement of the link that you are formalizing or that you introduce the concept that fraud is in NOCLAR. Why wouldn't that exist already? I don't understand. Is it a question of formulation or is it a question of substance?
I would say I'll pick this one up. So I would say in the extant standard, there was certainly it was certainly asking the auditor to consider whether there were additional responsibilities under of course non-compliance with laws and regs and ethics. But there was a lot of thought from the board and the thinking was we need to drive this behavior. And in driving this behavior, we need to create a hard coding link between these two things, such that the auditor will always consider it and think about what those incremental responsibilities are under NOCLAR, even under the ethics standard. Are there communication requirements under NOCLAR? So it was a changing behavior kind of tactic to draw a hard coding there.
Thank you, Angelo. Sadia, please.
Thank you for the presentation. This is a very important project, and like Christelle, I also honed in on the link between the IASB project and our IESBA code. I was wondering if you all received any feedback on NoCloud through your consultation period, and were there any questions that our board would have to respond to?
Perhaps I'll pick, Jasper, you pick this up, for sure.
Yeah, there were during our after the exposure draft, we definitely got comments on how ISO 240 interacts. So our fraud standard interacts with our standard on non-compliance with laws and regulation. There was definitely about the concept that fraud is no-clar, and we got comments around that. Like generally everybody agreed with that fraud is always no-clar, but there were a few respondents who questioned that statement that fraud is always no-clar. We discussed it as a board, and this is of course the definition as fraud is in the IASB standards. And of course, that's an important caveat here. But we discussed this with the task force and in the board, and we think it generally holds true. And so there were some comments about that on the relationship between ISO 240 and ISO 250, and also about the work effort. Do you then need to have two separate processes? Do you need to first do your fraud understanding? For example, if there's a fraud or suspected fraud, do you first need to do your understanding of the fraud or suspected fraud under our fraud standard, and then do go through the same separate process of a separate process for through our standard on non-compliance of laws and regulation? So those are the things. It's really about the interaction of these standards that we also clarified, that you can leverage off like your understanding of the fraud or suspected fraud. When you obtain understanding of the fraud or suspected fraud, you can leverage off that understanding when dealing with some of the requirements in our standard on non-compliance with laws and regulation. So I think those were the main things that we heard back. Angelo, is there anything that you think another thing was there? But
no, Jasper, no, that I agree with the way you've articulated. That's great.
Thank you very much, Jasper. Vania, please.
Thank you, Jasper and Angelo, for the presentation. Very interesting. We've been waiting very anxiously for this project to be concluded, because at IOC, we consider the possibility, with so many cases of fraud popping up in the world, if there was a necessity for changing something in our code, or just stressing what is already there and maybe people are not looking enough. And so we anticipate that your project will be very important for us to follow in this monitoring. And we also appreciate if you, under your job in establishing this standard for the IASB, if you identified anything that is a weakness in our code that we should look at, we appreciate the feedback from you. And congratulations, it's a very interesting and well done job. Thank you.
Thank you, Vania. I don't know, I don't have anything directly on the weaknesses in your code that we identified. That's something that I'm not aware of that we identified. When liaising with the team, we really focus on the linkages between our fraud standards and the concepts that we have in our fraud standards and your code. That was really the focus of it, but there wasn't any weaknesses to the IESBA code were highlighted to us based on the outreach that we did and also during the exposure process.
Thank you, Jasper. I think it's going to be for us to assess once the standard is approved, that we should really see if there is anything that we should do. I don't believe with the code, but some guidance or something that may help not only enhancing the impact of the fraud standard, but also what we already have in that respect in our code. It would be a good thing. Thank you for that note, Vania. Christelle, do you still want to speak? Yeah, please go ahead.
Just rebounding on that, I was wondering if there was going to be any communication campaign on this new standard by IAASB, and if it could be an occasion for us to re-promote the NOCLA or be sure that there is some leverage on that?
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. I don't know what the plans are on the ISSB side, but we might want to think about something.
Yeah, I think on the on the ISSB side, we're keeping generally like it's won't be as big as a campaign as we do, for example, for sustainability. It will be what we will planning after PIRB certification. Once we receive that, then we'll publish a fact sheet based for conclusion. We're also going to do a video series on fraud, on the change to the standard, and we're going to do that together with our colleagues who worked on the going concern project, or on a going concern standard. So that is the communications that will go out. We don't think there's a need for an implementation guide, for example, and maybe just for everyone. So the effective date of the standard is for audits starting on or after December 15, 2026. So that effective date is aligned with our effective date of the going concern standard, and hopefully also of our changes to PI because of the PI project. And all those changes together, why we want to have the same effective date, because they all have an effect on the auditor's report.
Thank you very much, Jasper. Rania, please.
Thank you. This is very interesting. So my question is, I'm looking at the slide that is before us right now. And so obviously the key revisions basically strengthen what's already in the code. And then you introduce a separate section of requirements for when fraud or suspected fraud is identified. But are there any additions or revisions towards identifying fraud or suspected fraud? So in terms of actual procedures towards identifying potential fraud. Thank you.
I'll definitely pick this up. Yeah. So certainly the standard has been strengthened across the board. And it's as Jasper mentioned earlier, there was an objective of strengthening the risk assessment and in the responses area, fraud or suspected fraud can be identified through various mechanisms. Certainly risk assessment is one of them. When you're responding to assess risk, that would be another. But there's also when you're evaluating perhaps the entity's whistleblower program, which is a new requirement in the standard. You may learn that several allegations of fraud have come through the entity's whistleblower program. So all of these are mechanisms that the auditor where fraud or suspected fraud might come to the auditor's attention, and therefore would push the auditor into these requirements to then perform these additional procedures. So it's to answer your point, it's more than just adding a separate section. The entire standard will funnel you into these requirements based on the fact that various elements of the audit have been strengthened.
Thank you, Angelo. And finally, Ken, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Jasper and Angelo, for the excellent presentation on basically the revisions to the fraud standard. I just had two questions, just in relation to, I suppose, the responses to the enhanced risk assessment process, and more specifically in relation to two aspects. One is, has IESBA essentially looked at the issue of competence when having applied this enhanced risk assessment process, the audit identifies that there is indeed an enhanced or higher risk of fraud. Is response, or has there been consideration of building into the response that the firm would bring into play the necessary competencies, and if necessary, the necessary expertise, whether internal or external, to address the particular areas where the risks have been identified, relating to fraud. And I suppose my second question is, in many instances of fraud, as we know in the past, there have been dominant personalities, and those dominant. I mean, I suppose one of the famous cases is the Maxwell case in the UK, and those dominant personalities very often exert pressure through intimidation, through other means, etc., to try to get their way and to try to essentially try to make sure that the fraud doesn't get disclosed, etc. So I suppose my question is then, has the IESBA given consideration to the auditor's responsibilities under the IESBA code in relation to dealing with the issue of pressure, especially undue pressure from the client in a fraud context?
I think you can. So let me start with your first question. Yes, we've added a requirement related to the competence. Like it's really on the engagement resources. So that is linking to our standard on quality management at the engagement level, ISO 220. So we have a requirement now for the auditor to see whether the knowledge on the engagement is sufficient, and that of course then deals with as well that the risks are there. Like that's based on the facts and circumstances of the audit engagement. So there you can also think of, do you maybe need a specialist like someone from forensic to be involved in the audit? There is no requirement to have a forensic involved in it. We thought that would go too far, but we do have this overarching requirement on engagement resources, on which then application material hangs off to identify circumstances when it might be useful to have, for example, a forensic specialist, but it could also be other specialists. We highlighted that as well. Depending on the environment of the entity is very highly technical. You might want to have someone technical in the way of technology. You might also have a specialist on that to sure you understand how how all the systems and processes work. So that has been in there. On the second one, Angelo, do you want to take that one? Or?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a shot at it, Jasper. So hi, Ken. So there's Jasper mentioned ISO 220 in terms of resourcing, right? In terms of the consideration of specialists. I'll also point to ISO 220. So ISO 220, in terms of, your question was, what the dominant personalities, impediments is, I think, what you're referring to. Impediments that would otherwise impede the exercise of professional skepticism. Strong management that might step in the way and put in undue time pressures on you. There's a lot of application material that we've added. Well, I would say not a lot. There's application material that's been added that also leverages off of concepts in ISO 220, which is, you'll recall, quality management at the engagement team level. So at the engagement level, so this application materials refers to how the auditor might identify impediments to the exercise of professional skepticism. One of them might be very, strong management that might be creating arbitrary and unnecessary impediments to the exercise of professional skepticism. And it also, the application material spells out some examples on how the auditor might deal with it. This is all leveraging off of concepts that already exist off of ISO 220, but we thought we would put a little bit of a fraud lens on it and introduce it in the standard, because that is a very, very critically important aspect that we wanted to make sure that the auditor was equipped to deal with.
And in addition to that, Angelo, like it's also included in like we have a list in the appendix 1, that lists all the fraud risk factors, and your point, Ken, is also included in that. So it's one of the items in there. Is about when you have there is a fraud risk factor when there is one dominant person, and then you also have like application material in the standard that deals with this as well. Like the saying is on scalability, that if you have a small entity, when there is then there's a single individual that's dominant, that's not that's not directly a fraud risk factor, but that it does create a risk of management override of controls. So the concept is in there. It's also in the application material.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, Jasper and Angelo. I don't see anyone else. Sorry, Janine, please.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to make a few comments. First of all, I welcome that there is this coordination also on the project level between the two standard setting boards. And this is, of course, very important. Coordination and cooperation between both boards is a fundamental feature, actually, of the standard setting system. So it's good to see this in practice during a board meeting. And I'd like to take also the opportunity to say that the PIOB would like to highlight the importance of common IESBA and IASB communication activities, particularly on projects like the sustainability assurance projects, as both the ethical and technical sustainability assurance standards are aiming to be perceived as one interoperable package in the marketplace. So that coordination is often used, but from a PIB perspective, we often also talk about shouldn't there be not also joint communications where applicable, and where when it has added value to the marketplace, when you have a project like sustainability assurance where you even have same definitions, a terminology that you aligned in both projects. So just wanted to make that comment to reinforce that again, since we have both boards now at the same time here present. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Janine. I don't know if Jasper or Angelo want to react.
Yeah, thank you, Janine. I think it's generally the coordination between the boards. I think it's good to do also for the outside world. And I think I think sustainability is of course something a project where we both have been working on our standards. So I think generally, I think Ken, probably you and Willy have been closely liaising on sustainability. I'm not, and Angela also not directly involved in that. But yeah, no, I think it's a good point.
Thank you, and thank you, Janine. Yes, we are aware of the benefits of joint actions, communications, and etc. And the experience that we had from sustainability will, of course, be taken forward to other projects, other initiatives. So we haven't stopped there. So thank you, but thank you for reinforcing that message. With this, I think that we are coming to the end of this conversation with the IASB. So thank you so much, Jasper and Angelo. As you saw, this triggered a lot of interest and questions and very positive reactions from the IESBA board. So thank you again, and apologies again for the delay. I know that you had a hard stop at 11:15, so we are going to release you, and thank you very much. And good luck for next week for the approval of the standard.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good luck with the rest of the meeting. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. It's almost over. So on our side, we will break now, as we had agreed. We will restart at 11:45. 11:45, back to the room, please. Thank you very much.
Jean just sent the questions. Yeah.
Okay, so we have the questions that have been already sent. I hope that everyone have received them. And I'll pass immediately the floor to Linda to present the revised questions. Okay?
Yes, please, if you would, Jean is working her way down here. You can share them? Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we have the updated questions now. They've been revised based on your comments. So we have, so question 1 is going to go under the investment schemes section. If you'll, no, the related entity, sorry, the related entity section. So that's kind of where the questioning starts. So if you can take a look, please. Thank you so much.
Okay, question 1 is on the screen. Does anyone have any kind of comments, disagreements, or suggestions? No, if not, agreed.
If I can explain on this one, we've got a highlighted portion. So we have added that because there was concern that we weren't necessarily scoping in properly who should be considered within the criteria. So we've added that.
Thank you, Linda, for the clarification. Is everyone in agreement? Okay. Chana, sorry.
Do we need unrelated?
I think what we will do, Chana, is we're not trying to refer to unrelated third parties in the questions without having previously explained what we're referring to.
So Chana, this comes under the section which details about when it's an unrelated third party and where it might be doing these types of activities. So then it flows from that we're asking about that scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, are they unrelated, really?
Well, that's what we're trying to assess. Yes, but that's what we're saying. If they're not considered to be having control or significant influence, but we're still seeing them undertaking these types of activities, this is what we've been seeing, and that's what we're asking if that's the situation.
Yeah, I was not wanting to make any comments, but I have the same slight discomfort about this term, because people will say, if they are unrelated, what's the problem? But yeah, I understand that it's difficult to find another concept to define them, but still, but nobody until now. Yesterday, Tomoyo raised the point, but today nobody raised it. So I assume that besides Chan and me, everyone is comfortable with the term, which may lead to some, I think, misunderstandings and some finding it a little bit strange. Why are we discussing unrelated third parties? So, yeah, Rania, please.
Yeah, so I like the questions. I mean, I went through all of them, but I do agree that the term unrelated third parties is a cause for confusion. So, but I'm not commenting because it was raised yesterday, but I definitely agree. So,
Rich, please.
Yeah, just a point on the highlighted section there. I'm a little concerned that we're capturing with that entities that have nothing more than a mechanical role, like the preparation of accounting records and that's often not parties that have any decision making. So,
but don't you think?
I'm not objecting to it in there, but I think we should be alert to we may get some unusual responses as people think about that differently. A lot of times in these structures, the record keeping is not the key. It's this economic decisions that are the key. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. I believe that the term significant influence keeps those situations out of the scope of the question. But also, if in any case, because people may understand things differently, if there are responses which we consider to definitely being falling outside of what we need to capture, because there is no significant influence in the sense that you are describing, of course, we can, we won't take that into consideration if there are responses which do not meet the objective of the question, which I think is clear. I mean, significant influence is significant influence. It's mechanical influence. It's not significant, I would say. But anyway, I see your point, but I think that and the heads up is important when the team will read the responses and screen what's relevant. David, please.
Maybe a suggestion just to address the concern that was raised by Chana and yourself. What if we said something like, where the audit entities third parties to the scheme, rather than saying unrelated, and just narrow it down?
Could you say that again, David?
Absolutely. So what if we say something like, where the audit entities third parties meet the following criteria, rather than say unrelated? Because then it doesn't get into whether they're related or not related. It's just about the third parties.
My thought on that is I would, and this is just me, I would be looking at third parties, like from the company perspective, to say, okay, well, this is a third party to the company. This is an investment advisor that is advising the company. So if we say third parties, the auditor's third party.
No, I'm saying the audit entities, third parties. It's not the auditors, third parties.
So the audit clients.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, whatever the right
Thank you.
terminology
Yeah,
is,
got
but
it.
it's
Thank
the
you.
third parties to that body
Got
that
it.
we're concerned with.
Thank you.
Whether they're related or not, perhaps it just reduces the confusion and it just leaves it, wider open. But it's within the unrelated section anyway, but it might be a compromise.
Yeah, I think so, Linda. We can say where third parties. Yeah, I'm not sure whether we should. Maybe we use. Well, we can say where third parties to the audit client, or you already have to the scheme. Yeah, third party. So so we come back to Chana's suggestion.
Can I go back also to the paper, which request for comments specifically talks about seeking stakeholders' views on application of the code to involving unrelated third parties. So we're specifically saying we're asking questions about unrelated third parties. Then we go through the paper to kind of explain who unrelated third parties are. And then we have a question about unrelated third parties. So if somebody's reading through this document, they understand the questions are going to be about unrelated third parties. And then it seems, I mean, we've kind of, again, defined that term. We want consistency. If we change it now, then basically there's this potential that people are going to read that as something different than the unrelated third parties that we are talking about in the paper. And that's what concerns me.
Well, sorry, James, please.
Linda has a good point that it's read in context. Having said that, are we not looking for third parties other than related parties? Because we know what a related party is. So we are looking for third parties, comma, other than related parties to whom we're trying to address. Because we know what we're dealing with. We're trying to deal with those that are not related parties and what they're for to do, just as a suggestion.
Yeah, no, but as Linda has suggested, and again, we're reading the questions a bit out of context, because as Linda has said, the consultation paper will explain that we're looking at those third parties other than the related parties. So that already should have been explained in the consultation paper. So we're not trying to essentially define it in the question.
Still, I mean, sorry for insisting myself. Still, I think that it's strange we saw Tomoyo's reaction as someone who works for CIV saying, how can you qualify an investment management company as an unrelated third party? We know that it's unrelated to the sense that it's not scoped into the definition, but for the broad public, including CIVs, people working for CIVs, etc., that doesn't sounds strange.
Yeah, and we completely understand that. And the team has talked about this a lot. We just don't have better options. I mean, that's where we are. It's just like, we started out thinking about, okay, this is looking at independence and the application of the related entity definition in the code. So what's the opposite of related entity? An unrelated entity.
The problem is that in the language, normal language, unrelated is not the same thing that we are saying here.
Definitely.
Unrelated has no relationship. Does not relate to. That's how people who don't know the notion.
I know, and we take your point. It's just we don't have.
Well, let's not
help
prosecute. Could a suggestion be associated third parties? In other words, there's a degree of association, but these are not. Association can be read very broadly to include the related parties. So we can define in the consultation paper that when we're referring to these associated parties, there is some sort of connection, but we're not scoping in the related entities, right? We can explain this in the consultation paper, but maybe to address Gabriela's and Tomoyo's point, if we were to refer to associated third parties or third parties associated with the scheme, etc.
I don't know.
I would just recommend that we just think of it. I know we engaged with an investor, associated and unassociated was also a term that was used. So I think we just need to think a little bit about that as well.
Okay. Tomoyo.
Thank you, Gabriela. I was about to compromise on that point about this unrelated third parties, because the revised draft has a bit more additional things like adding this responsible in that when you refer to unrelated third party. But if you can consider to change it to another expression, it will be helpful. But the only thing I wanted to request is to get to explain the importance of this exercise, that the audit of the CIV is very important to endorse the accuracy of the financial statement of the CIB. And this will help to imply that the investment advisors are acting in the best interest of the client, meaning fulfilling the fiduciary duty. So the independence of the auditor against this investment advisor, which is one of the unrelated third party, is really important for the investment advisors to fulfill the fiduciary duty. So if you can add such message in the executive summary, I think it will more attract the investors and provide more input about this consultation paper. And regarding to this question, this part, I expect that too. Maybe there will be other suggestion other than this ABC from the investment advisors if you send this consultation paper. So to the answers to the question, probably there will be some answers saying no, ABC won't be enough, or ABC you should replace this one, and then we can discuss, consider further. So we can leave it here and get some thoughts and then revise accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomoyo, and your suggestions will be well considered. Thank you. Obichuku, please.
Thank you. I just want to agree with Linda's position that, for lack of better word, related serves better, because when you say associated, you also have an accounting terminology have the meaning for associated. So unrelated, given to the fact that they have already explained what that term means. So it's said in context. So the reader should also read it in context, whether you're an accountant or a non-accountant, for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Obichukwu. Rania, please.
So just on this issue again, so I like the suggestion of associated, third parties associated, or what James suggested. But if you insist on keeping unrelated, then perhaps you may want to consider putting it in between quotations. So it might like, I mean, just to indicate that it's not, I mean, it's a term that you're using because, and perhaps you would define it ahead of time that, you know, unrelated as per the current definition of related parties.
Yeah, in the body of the paper, we've defined unrelated third parties. So that's why we feel like to use unrelated third parties here.
But I would, I mean, I understand there are different arguments for and against. So if you ultimately decide to stick with the term unrelated, I would recommend that you put it in between quotations, just to suggest that it's not in the English language meaning of the term. It's just that a term that you are using, like sort of a description, like just a recommendation.
Let's listen to everybody to see if you can, Rich, please.
Yeah, along those lines, if you look at where you have the definition of unrelated entities, third parties in paragraph 9, I think if you were inserted after the word capture, the words third parties, which are not related entities under the code, then you can use that defined term throughout. That may be a better way to address it right in the front of up front where you started to, because I see where I know you did that and I thought that was good, but maybe that's the expansion, that we make it very bluntly clear. We're talking about entities that are not already covered under the standards in the code.
Okay. Linda, John, back to you.
Okay, I think Rich's suggestion is reasonable. Rania, I think maybe that would, because I'm thinking if we try to do quotes, we use unrelated it's distracting. Yeah, so maybe Rich's suggestion would address your, okay, thank you. Shall we, okay, so we're comfortable with the language that was in question in the previous, section, right? The contributions from James, and then the part C that was highlighted and added, we're keeping that in, yes? Okay. Because I know there was okay. Fine, no, it's okay. So let's go on to question 2. While we're cleaning up, question 2, comments.
Any comments on question 2? No, so you can move.
Question 3, please read and let us know if you have comments.
Question 3, comments? Question 4, can you move, please?
Can I please point out that questions 4 and 5 were added in response to Janine's comments earlier about the consistency point about, ensuring or asking about consistent application of the conceptual framework and practice. And then question 5, which is being proposed, deals with the issue of possible prohibited interest relationships or circumstances that need to be considered. So those are being proposed.
Luigi, please.
I found the question number 5 a little bit outside the tone and the purpose of this document. First of all, because we are still, at question 4, we are still inquiring about the perimeter that we need to consider or that the respondent are considering. And then we pop up with prohibition, like prohibition is the only one solution we could identify. If there are issues, we don't know yet. And so I don't think that this should be the way we are inquiring the respondents. I would prefer having them explaining whether they see any issue or any gaps or any matters that require amendments. And then through a following process, the board should come to the conclusion that an action is needed and which is this action. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. Any other comments? So, Luigi's comment, you will address it. Explaining it.
Fine, we'll address that. Let's move on to question 6, please. Okay, no comments on question 6, please. Any comments on question 7? No comments, so I think it's agreed. Okay, so Linda, next steps. Yeah, so. Oh, these steps. Yeah, so next steps, so I think there has been agreement in principle, agreement to the questions. I think what we're looking for today would be agreement to the consultation paper in principle, approval of the consultation paper in principle, so that we can release it. As we said, we've sent, or as you know, we've sent the document, the amended document to you that went out last night. So we would ask that you review that and get comments back to us, preferably by Monday. Ken?
Well, yeah, so my suggestion, first of all, is to make sure that we have considered all comments from the board. Are there any matters that board members would like to raise at this point that have not been previously discussed? Rich? Behind the questions, yes.
I'm going to send these in, but inadvertently, I think the paper describes the investment company complex as if it's a unique type of fund structure. It's not. Any fund could have an be construed an investment company complex if the fund was subject to the SEC rules. It's just the phrase used by the SEC. So I do think we need to fix that. Others may have other comments, but.
So sorry, Rich, just to confirm, the ICC, which we were trying to purvey, but that probably needs some amendment, but we were trying to say that the ICC is essentially a type of CIV. It's just one.
It's not.
It's not?
No, it's just a phrase used to describe the independence rules under the SEC. It's not unique to any type of fund. It doesn't represent a unique fund. That's my point. I think we need to adjust that wording.
Thanks, Rich.
So with Richard's comment, which we will take on board, are there any other matters that board members would like to raise at this point? If not, Chair, I would suggest that we take indicative approval from the board in principle, as Linda has indicated, subject to any board refinements, editorial refinements to the consultation paper, which in fact we will recirculate incorporating the revised questions and any tweaks. So we will recirculate early next week a revised draft with the full set of questions as updated and as agreed at the board. And then we will allow the board some time to come back to staff with any editorial adjustments or refinements. And then we will go forward with issuing the paper by the end of this month. And I think the proposal from the staff was to allow for about 75 days for respondents to come back to the board with comments.
We had 90 as a suggestion.
Was it 90?
Yep.
So we have a date or whatever, right, in the consultation paper. So about 90 day comment period for respondents, which will take us, if the paper were to go out end of March, essentially.
End of
that would take
June.
us to end of June.
We can consider the document approved in principle. And the next steps are going to be the ones that Ken referred to. So we hope to have a finally approved document by next week, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Incorporating board input, I'd probably say early the following week, yes.
Okay.
We'll allow sufficient time for the board to come back.
Fine. Before we close this session, I'd like encourage everyone, once the document is out, to spread the consultation document as much as you can. Mostly those who are close to those who are more difficult to reach. And here we have some people which are, for instance, working for or close to investment funds like Tomoyo, Paul, and etc. Do your best to make this reach different stakeholders so that we can at least try and do our best to have diversified responses, which in this respect, as in every respect, but here are going to be very important. So this is my ask to the board, also regulators who have connections to investment funds and etc. So thank you very much. Thank you, staff team or project team, for this great effort. This is being not an easy journey, this project, but we'll get there. And with this consultation paper, we are closer than we were before to a successful final once we get there. So with this, I'm going to close the public session of the board, but not before asking Ken to ask you something about the minutes. We need to approve the minutes.
Yep, so the minutes have been circulated to the board earlier this morning. There have been just a few very minor editorial suggestions that we've picked up. And I would ask the board if anyone on the board has any comments on the minutes from the December board meeting. If not, then we can take the minutes as approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you to those who provided these minor editorial refinements, which are always important, and to those who prepared the minutes and reviewed them, revised the minutes, and etc. It's a lot of work involved here, even if we don't usually highlight that. So as for this meeting, we are very late. I think that we are almost 1 hour late or something like that. So I'm going to be very quick in this my final remarks. Very, very short wrap up of what happened over these 3 days. So we had the approval in principle of the CIV's consultation document. And also the approval of the monitoring platform or the IMAG group. And the IMAG group and the terms of reference of this new group that will help with monitoring and support to implementation of the sustainability standards. So these are the continuation of things that we have done before, not only the CIVs, but on the adoption and implementation efforts and the idea to create this monitoring mechanism or instrument, which just demonstrates that we are following our direction and not abandoning what we are doing before, and keeping focused on making everything impactful, successful for the public interest. Apart from that, good developments and a very good discussion on firm culture and governance, mostly around the burning topic of the principles-based nature of the future standards, but also the need for strong guidance and strong non-authoritative material, the way they are going to be related, timelines, and etc. So heading for the 6 global roundtables that will start tomorrow here in New York with the first one, and that will be held over the next few weeks in different places and also virtually, involving hopefully a significant number of global stakeholders. And after that, we will be working to process the information that we will get from those roundtables and be presented with an update, at least in June. Hopefully, a little bit more than that, maybe a straw man of the standards, but that will depend on the substance of the responses and the nature of the responses received and the capacity of the project team to advance with this straw man. We also had a presentation from the IOC on the issue of private equity investment in audit firms, some points that the IOC may want to use to develop the staff alert plan to be published before the June board meeting at the latest, but as soon as they come up with a staff alert, the board will be informed and we'll see the staff alert before it's published, right? But it's still a staff alert, so it's the responsibility of the staff. We also had a presentation on the strategic communications approach for the IESBA. I think that these were the main topics that we addressed, but what happened during this meeting is that many strategic discussions arose from these concrete topics, which just demonstrates how much this board is evolving in terms of becoming a really strategic board, providing strategic direction to the project teams. Sorry, it's still difficult for me to say the name, but we are really evolving in this new working model. Of course, we will have to refine a few things in terms of the relationship of the staff with the board, but it's a new world and a new work approach that we are taking now. I need to thank warmly to all of you for the very good contributions. The board was very focused on the different topics, had very substantial contributions that I think just enrich the future work, but enrich us as a board as well. I need to thank the staff for the great work they done in preparing all the documents, all the materials, for the work done during the board meeting, at the margins of the meeting, in re-preparing the documents like on CIVs and adoption and implementation and etc. So this is very welcome, and we are very grateful to the staff as well, and also to those who again made this meeting possible and impeccable in terms of organization, in terms of how everything went. Asked you, Diana, and the others. Thank you very much to both of you. And it's very good to see that the board and the team is also moving. We had the announcement of 2 promotions, of which we are very proud. Cam and John, Rui joining us, and this moves. This is a dynamic board and a dynamic staff, hopefully and clearly growing and becoming more robust. And with this, the next meeting will be in June in New York. So we will meet here again in 3 months. As I had the opportunity to say, the next one will be in Portugal, in Lisbon. And I'll be very happy to see you there. And between this meeting and the next meeting, apart from the roundtables, we will have the summit on sustainability being organized by IFAC and IESBA, which will take place on the 14th of April in Paris. And we also have like a mini roundtable, or if we can call it like that, with the pharma firms on the 31st of March, if I'm not wrong, in Amsterdam, right? So as you see, these topics are keeping us busy, and we will, of course, debrief once we are here in June, if not before. Thank you so much to all of you, to all those who attended in person here, observing the meeting, and still seeing some faces there. Thank you for your interest and for your presence. Thank you to all the technical advisors, and thank you to all the observers online who took their time to join us in a different format these days. Obichuku, we hope to see you in person in June. Very much wanting to meet you for the first time in June, and hopefully that will be possible. Thank you for your patience as well, because I know that the hours are not the most appropriate for you, but it's better to have this possibility than not having anything. Thank you, and safe travels back. Well, we still have the executive session, but and I consider the session, the board meeting finished, closed. Thank you.